Bonjour, willkommen and howdy, and welcome to the latest video from the Fog Motorpool. Today we're at one of the premier shows in the West Country, and that is the Dig for Victory show here just on the outskirts of Bristol. We've brought along some of our kit, including the AMX13, and later on this video us doing a compare and contrast against a Sherman M4. There are some similarities I bet you probably wouldn't know, so we'll go through some interesting facts a bit later on. So for now, just a promise, and that is by the feedback that we've been having on the channel, that our sound isn't very good. So we are investing, and it's winging its way to us at the moment, a better quality microphone, so we'll be able to cut out some of this background noise that you can probably hear on this clip. I'm going to reiterate as well something that was we shot at the last show but didn't come out very well, and some people have asked us, how do we get this gun to go bang? So it's very simple. We can't really put a shell inside of the barrel. The reason for that is it won't seal properly, and also it will push a lot of noxious gases out through the end of the barrel. Now, we don't have a projectile either, so what we're actually doing is then just coating the barrel with basically acidic compounds and just ruining it. So there's just real no point in doing that. So how do we get around it? So what we actually use is something called a concussion pot, which I'm going to pick up from here. This is basically a very, very sturdy piece of pipe. It's got blanked off at one end, and there is a restriction at the front. Now this actually fits inside the end of the barrel quite comfortably, and you can probably see these wires, the black and red ones, running up the length of the barrel. The charge is placed inside of this concussion mortar or pot, and this sits just behind the end of the muzzle. Inside we have a dead man switch and a fire button, and we have a set of commands to make sure that we're all very safe. The charge is placed inside of here, and we usually use about between 250 to possibly up to 300 grams of black powder and petrol mixed in there as well, and that gives us a really nice bang, lots of smoke and lots of noise to keep the crowds entertained. So the charge goes in the end of this pot. This pot then goes in the end of the barrel, and then all of the explosion is thrown forward, mostly for effect. This way as well, we don't get any noxious gases travelling back down the barrel and into the turret and poisoning whoever's operating it for us. It's a very safe way of doing it, electrically operated, use a little 9-volt battery, but that's how you usually see these guns going bang. Bonjour, willkommen and howdy, and welcome to the Fog Motorpool. Excuse the voice, I've been driving the tank all day, inhaled a lot of dust, so it's left me a bit croaky. What we've got here is a couple of tanks. So over this shoulder here, we've got a Sherman, so I believe this is M4A2, is it? Okay, and over this one we got AMX13 105. The point of this little video is we're actually going to compare and contrast these two vehicles together. Now you may say to me, why do you want to do that? This tank is so completely different than that one. But the actual truth of it is they're not. They're actually quite closely related. Okay, so what have we got? So we've got two tanks. One here is a medium tank and this one is a light tank. Let's go and have a closer look at the two. First things first, let's state the obvious. The obvious is, this has tracks and this has tracks. Also, interestingly, the way that the tracks work on both of these vehicles, you will see that the road wheels are inside a set of prongs. So unlike other tanks where the prongs are on the outside of the wheels, you can actually see here, the road wheels are held inside of these, and it's exactly the same on the AMX. So already we've got some similarities between the two. We've got a front drive sprocket with a removable set of teeth, which you would have to do because this will wear out. And on the AMX as well, again, we've got a drive sprocket, and this time we've got a set of teeth. The biggest thing though, if you can actually look between these two, is the size of this. So over here on the Sherman we've got around 30 tons. It's what do we reckon that's at? Sort of 3 meters in height. It's a very tall tank. Over here, AMX13, well the 13 part of the name gives it away, it's meant to be 13 tons, this one's 15 tons, but this one's at 2 meters in height. So you may ask me why this tank here and this one here, why is this one so tall and why is this one not so tall? So the reason being, let's go through it. This tank here, the Sherman, has the motor inside of the rear of the hull, and that's driven through a drive shaft that goes down into the gearbox and then comes out in these two drive sprockets. On the AMX, the tank is actually in the front of the tank, not in the rear. So therefore, rather like the Citroën Traction Avant, which came out roughly around the same time that this was invented, then the engine is directly connected to the gearbox and then again straight to the front drive. So therefore, there is no running gear underneath the turret on this tank, but there is on this one. Now obviously having that running gear and the fact that the gun has to go up and down, so therefore the breech inside of the turret is rising and dropping, means that the turret basket has to sit on top of the infrastructure, so therefore the tank is much higher. What's better in a combat situation? Okay, well, we've got quite a lot of armour on the Sherman. The AMX is quite lightly armoured, but the AMX is lower in silhouette, so therefore spotting the tank, you may find you'll be able to see the Sherman before you saw the AMX. You may ask me, well, why compare these two tanks? Well, the interesting point is both were used by the French Army. This was their medium tank for quite a while at the end of the Second World War, and the AMX was in design during the Second World War, but obviously they'd been invaded by the Germans, so therefore their development was a bit slower, and this tank came out in 1947. So we've got a 1947, and this vehicle was designed in the late 30s and made in the 40s. So actually they're not that far apart, but interestingly the designs very much are. Now let's have a look. This tank here, I'm going to measure. I didn't bring a tape measure with me, so I'm going to use my feet. Okay, so each one of my feet is 1 foot in length. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 feet in width, this tank. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Well, hey, 9 as well. So in fact, the two tanks are the same width. Okay, so why are both of these tanks at 9 feet in width? Well, the reason is they need to go on trains. How can you move a main or a medium-sized battle tank and a light tank to the front? The quickest and easiest way is to put them onto train wagons. And each of the wagons are 9 feet in width. So therefore, that's why the width of these tanks were sort of restricted. Okay, so we're looking about the differences between this and this again, and we've talked about the 75mm. So this is a 75mm gun, and the tank behind me, the AMX, was originally a 75mm as well. These were upgraded, in fact both of them, and some of the guns from these AMX tanks were placed inside the Sherman. In fact, the Egyptian army went as far as to take the turret off of this tank and to place it on the hull of this one. What does that mean? That means the turret ring is exactly the same size. So at the beginning of this video you thought, well, how can this possibly be commonality between this vehicle and this one? Well, the fact is the turret ring is exactly the same size. I could in theory take the turret from this tank. I'd have to do some shenanigans with the basket, but it would fit on the AMX13, and I could take the AMX13 turret and place it on top of this tank. So there's some commonality between it. It sort of ends around there, I'm afraid. So the fact is this has, or was designed with a Chrysler multi-bank engine. So there's a number of Chrysler engines linked in the back. At the moment it's using a radial engine, but this is petrol based with everything in the rear. Now, why in the rear of the tank? And why is this in the front of this tank? The reason is, this was intended to be repaired in the field. So if it was hit or there was a problem, then a team could come out into the field, lift that engine out, replace it, and the tank would carry on in use. This, unfortunately, is near impossible to be able to get the engine out of this one. We've got a very large engine and it needs to come out these two doors in the front. As you can imagine, that means a partial dissembling of the engine. It needs to come out at quite an angle and is quite a feat. I know because I've actually done it. So therefore, This is not repairable in the field. This would have gone back to a base, something called an echelon, okay, so like a number 2 echelon, and it would have been worked on in a garage, something we can't do in the field. So in effect, this is rather like, let's say, a modern motor car, front wheel drive, quite cheap to make, it gets smashed, it gets written off. Let's just get another one. With the Sherman, on the other hand, American engineering and ideology was to take the engine out and fix it and get this back into action. Okay, so why is the engine in the front of this tank and not in the rear? Well, we've talked about keeping the silhouette low, which we understand, but also it affords a certain amount of protection for the crew. Okay, because you've got a gearbox, a differential and an engine, an incoming round would have to pierce through all of that material before it was able to get inside of the tank and injure the crew. Yes, the driver is here at the front, and that's why we have so much additional auxiliary equipment placed onto the glassy plate here to try and deflect rounds should they come in. But the whole point is, as I said before, this is a disposable tank. The round would come in, it would be caught by the engine or the gearbox, the tanks are right off, the crew get out because they're the most valuable asset, and they'll be placed into another tank and then continue fighting. With the American tank, we've got quite a thick amount of armour on the front here, yes, and we do have the gearbox in the front, but because of the deflection angle, because of the thickness of the armour, then the crew is quite protected by it. A gasoline engine in the back, it's a dangerous piece of kit. You really want to keep that away from incoming rounds. Okay, so we've got a Sherman over here. So what sort of crew have we got in there? So up in the turret we've got 2 men. We have a driver. There's also on the bow gun another member of the crew, and also we've got a radio operator. That's 5 people. Now if this tank is taken out, that's 5 people out of the regiment, 5 people out of action. That's quite a lot of people to lose in one vehicle, but they all had specific tasks to do, which meant that they could focus on those tasks and do them to the best of their ability. Over on the AMX, okay, we've got 3 crew, and doubling up is not an understatement with this. Okay, the driver's very much the driver and may have been the mechanic as well. But up in the turret, we've got the commander, and he's manning the radios, and we've also got the gun. I'll call him the aimer. We can't call him the loader because this is an auto-loading a vehicle, and he's in there as well. So we've actually got 3. So if this tank was hit and the 3 men were lost, it's probably in a better position than if the Sherman was hit and we had 5 people lost. So therefore we can obviously start to see this economies of scale. I've talked about the cost as well. I mean, the armour on this tank is pitiful. I mean, it's my tank, but I know, and I'm actually playing it down here, but it really is thin, both on the front, on the side, and on the back is, well, just hardly existent. The whole reason is this was a cheap tank to go in, to strike, and with an auto-loader get 6 rounds down really quickly and just clear off. With the Sherman, a medium tank, then therefore we wouldn't expect it to slog it out, but it certainly could withstand rounds and return them. So 2 very different ideologies about how these were to be used, but at the end of the day they're the same width, they have the same guns, they were probably about the same horsepower, let's be honest, at the end of the day. This one's a lot heavier because it's got thicker armour, this one's lighter. With these 2 tanks, finally, let's summarise. They were looking for 3 things in its balance, and one is the armour, and one is the firepower, and one is the mobility. So these 2 tanks have strengths in each one of these areas. In the Sherman tank, there is a lot of armour. The firepower is very good for the age of the vehicle, but that was quickly eclipsed when things started to develop, certainly at the end of the war and afterwards. And also it's quite fast, and we were racing together today, and we'll probably show you those clips later on around the ring. On the AMX, in this particular version with 105, it's got quite a punch. It's very fast, but woefully low on the armour, so therefore it really probably couldn't handle anything more than a 50 caliber strafing across it or artillery bursts. So there we go. In conclusion, 2 lovely tanks, nice to see them in preservation here in the UK. They both draw the crowds. We had a bit of a race with them earlier. Perhaps we'll have another one tomorrow and we'll see if we can get that filmed. But great to see these two together. Great to show you the commonality and the differences between the two. Thanks for watching, and we'll catch you soon.